art materials. I'm really excited to bring you this loose floral watercolor painting demonstration. We're going to be using Sennelier watercolors on a 9x12 cold press Fabriano watercolor block. We're going to be using a reference image to help frame the idea of what we would like our loose floral painting to look like. And you can find that on our bundle page. So go check that out and you'll find all the materials that we're using here today so that you can make a loose floral painting of your own. And if you're following along, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be making a couple of color washes here in my Flower Well palette. And I've gone ahead and made a quick sketch of where I want my watercolor elements to go. So my foliage and my blossoms. And I think that a quick sketch can really help, especially if you're a beginner with loose florals, just to be able to map out where you want everything to go, because it's very, as we said, it's very loose, and the washes start flowing, and well, we'll find out here shortly once we get started. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and mix up the greens for my foliage. I'm going to take a quick look at my reference image here. I have greens, I have magentas and reds, pinks, peaches, yellow, all kinds of colors that I can incorporate into this design. So to get started, I'm going to bring in a couple of different colors of green. So we have a forest green that we're going to start with. And I can kind of mix my colors together as long as I'm using analogous colors. So colors that are close to each other on the color wheel. So I can mix my greens together and I can mix my yellows together, but I won't necessarily want to mix those with my reds. Otherwise I'll get grays and other neutral tones and things like that. So starting with our foliage, I've just got a little bit, and if I just want a small amount, I can use this corner of the well palette. So my greens and yellows. Now I've got a couple of containers of water over here, and I'm just going to use my pipette to distribute some water. You can use something like a 1:5 ratio of 1 part paint to 5 parts water, and you can test the intensity of that wash and see if you want to take it up or down. This looks like it might be pretty dark. One thing to think about, you might want to have a test sheet of paper off to the side so that you can test the intensity of your washes. One of the beautiful things about painting with loose florals is trying to do that in one take. And you want your washes to be just transparent enough to be able to satisfy that one take, but light enough to still have the whimsy of the loose floral effect. So I'm going to mix these up here, and I've got a little test piece. And I think I want my washes to be just a little bit lighter, and I'm testing them over here. So I think that dark is pretty dark. I can bring it down a little bit. Okay, so just a little tip for you guys out there. Now I'm going to use 2 different size round brushes to make this painting. And these are just Blick synthetic watercolor brushes, but I've got a size 6 and a size 10 that I'm going to be using. And you just want to match up that brush size with the size and shape that you're going to be painting. So I'm going to start for the foliage with my smaller brush, and I'm going to start over here, and I really want my brush to do the talking. So really this is all about how you apply pressure onto the paper. And when you do that, you're going to, especially for our foliage, you're going to want to just leave a little opening there for some highlighting. And that's something with this style of painting that can really help to tell the story of of your botanicals. And I can incorporate, using a wet into wet technique, some of these other colors and activate them all at the same time. Now when you're painting foliage, a little technique I like to do is to give the foliage just a little bit of texture. These kind of little leaf edges. And this is just using my brush to embellish. Nothing special. Just something to help that dialogue and to help explain what we're looking at, right? So it's not so much that it's a detailed painting adventure. It's really about letting your brush do all the work, do all the talking. Okay, so we're going to add a little bit of texture and a little bit of highlight. Okay, so let's keep that momentum. Let's keep using our round size 6. Let's work our way around this paper and get this foliage worked in. And this is perfect for following along brush stroke by brush stroke so that you can see at least one way to approach your loose florals. There are so many different avenues that we can take with this style of painting. And I truly believe that anyone out there who wants to do this style of painting can do it with the right amount of practice. Because again, once you make that muscle memory from these brush strokes, then I think you'll have a lot easier time applying the same concept to any watercolor painting that you're working on. Now, I can put down this heavy wash, and I want to show you a quick technique called lifting. When you have some pooling of watercolor here and you want to remove any amount of color or water because you want to bring down the intensity of a color, you can just lift it away. And this paper is making it extremely easy to do that. So a good quality paper and good quality paints like the Sennelier are going to be a perfect match for this kind of painting. Now you do want to be careful, and I almost had too much of a wash on my brush. You don't want too much paint. And that's what makes this process so light and doable, because we're not making a ton of different colors. We're not trying to add into too much detail. We're just kind of describing the various botanicals. I'd like to make these a little bit lighter than the others. So I'm going to lift with my same brush and lift. And see how that brings the intensity down so much. So if you want to highlight or use that as a tool for highlighting, like here, keep that in mind as we work our way through this painting. So let's keep going. Wherever I apply more pressure and I widen my brush, that's where I'll get a wider brush stroke. So if you're just starting out and you want to start with something like these Blick brushes, I would highly recommend it. All right, so here, let's leave some negative space. And you know what? I want a little bit of brown. Get my extra stash here. We're going to use a wet into wet technique to bring a little bit of darker color. I've got a little bit of brown, and I'm just going to touch it where I want that to go while the paint is still a little bit damp. Okay, so let's do that here. All right, so if we want to use these colors that are working together that aren't going to give you a whole lot of gray, that's a really good secret or tip, I don't know about secret, to keep in mind. We're going to get started painting these blooms. Some rose blooms here, and that gets us started. I like these neutral tones and making sure they're working together. Now I have 2 containers of water, which you might not be able to see. And I'm using one to clean my brushes, and I'm using the other one to maintain clean water. And I'm distributing that water with a pipette. That's a tip that I picked up along the way working on watercolors, and I'll never do it any other way. So if you have the ability to have a couple of different containers, some pipettes, which you'll find on the bundle page, along with the watercolors, you'll have a lot easier time keeping that water clean. Okay, and I'm making sure that I'm leaving a little bit of highlight. And I think you just get used to, if you're out there painting along, maybe you agree with me, I think you really get used to the brush stroke. And you can lean on that to help get you through. Okay. Now we have some rose buds. I'm painting those in with a little bit brighter green. Now, you might be wondering why I'm not already moving on to painting the rose blossoms. The reason for that is because we do want to mind the drying times when we're painting with watercolor. So just like any painting medium, when you want your colors to not necessarily blend together, you want to allow a little bit of drying time so that when you go back in, your colors will kind of stick to that layer. You won't have a pooling of color. So my point being, if we jumped ahead and while everything was still wet on our foliage, when we go to paint in these rose blooms in various areas, we don't necessarily want those colors to blend. A little bit of blending can be good, but mostly I don't want my reds and greens to mix. So just something to keep in mind as we work through this. And I've got a pretty comfortable pace. So something to think about if you're starting with loose florals is that it can help to work a little bit quickly. You know, if you can keep a certain pace, it can really help you to kind of understand how to get that spontaneity out of your work. I think that's one of the things that we really like about loose florals is that, that feeling of spontaneity. And again, you don't have to work with a sketch, but I always like to have at least a little bit of a plan before I go into something. Of course, you don't need necessarily a full-blown plan, but I do think it can help. And I would definitely encourage pre-planning. Now, this paper is holding up exactly how we want it to do. And you may not be able to tell this on camera. Hopefully you can. As your watercolor paper, so we're working on a block, and as your watercolor paper on the block absorbs the water, it's going to look like it's swelling right there where you placed that color wash. So, and as soon as it's dry, it won't look like it's raising up off of your block. It's going to go back flat and stay that way, and it's going to really keep your paper, save it from buckling and warping. And that is so important with watercolor. You don't want the washes that you're using here to start to warp your paper, because then when you want to go have it framed, sell it to a client, it's going to be a lot harder to deal with. All right, let's do a couple more before we wrap up our foliage and we move on to our blossoms. A couple here. I've got a little one here. I want to show you a little trick because we have a white flower that I'm painting our stems in for right now. And you'll notice I'm just holding my arm steady. I'm trying not to get it in my paint, so I'm holding it away, but I'm also trying to hold it steady so that I can maintain a certain distance between my painting and the hand. All right. So painting the white flower, just finishing up this little piece of foliage here. Right here, I'm actually going to use, if you're thinking about painting white flowers, here's a tip. I'm going to start over. To paint white, I'm going to use a shade, and I'm going to use it in a very transparent manner. So I'm going to take a little bit of this Payne's Gray. I'm going to take my clean water with a pipette. I'm going to make a really, really light wash. And I'll know that it's light because I'm going to test it on my test paper over here. All right, so there's your Payne's Gray. Grab my test paper. So if we want something that's nice and light, maybe we go even lighter than that. Let's add more water. And what that's going to do is it's going to show up as almost like a shadow. That's really what we want. That you can see the difference in the value. And when it dries, it'll be even just a little bit drier. So let's take a little bit of that on our brush, on the very edge of it. We don't want a whole lot of wash there. And then we're just going to touch it on. And you can see that just a very light shadow will appear. I'm going to try not to cover this up with my hands so that you can see that go on. But I love this little trick. Just using a Payne's Gray. It's just a neutral color. It appears as a shadow. If you have black, you could probably really, really, really dilute that black and get a nice, just a little bit of shadow. And as that dries, you're going to see it's going to be nice and light. And I can lift, look at this, I can just suck that excess wash right up, and I can adjust the value based on how much lifting I want to do. All right, that's perfect. Now let's move on to those beautiful, luscious blooms that I know we're all looking forward to painting. Let's take advantage of some of these scarlets and reds, and in particular this rose opera color that really seems to flow through our palette here. So let's turn our well palette here. Yep, and we'll start with this rose color. You can see how bright and vibrant that's going to be, and I just want to focus on that for a moment while we get some of these blooms painted in. Let's make a color wash. And I like to adjust this color just oh so slightly, give it a little more of a rosy red punch by adding just a touch of this vermilion. And let's add water to that as well. We always want to make a wash And we'll get these mixed up here. I love seeing this bright color come through. Gets me really excited to paint these blooms. Let's test the intensity here. Look at that bright, intense pink. Okay, I'm excited for that. And we'll get this rouge, and I'm just going to take some of this and just bring it over. It's just going to make this pink color a little more rosy. As you can see, just transformed there. I like it's a little bit warmer. All right, let's paint in these rose blooms, and for the smaller blooms I'm going to continue to use my round size 6. And we're just going to do a couple of subtle things here that are going to make a big impact. Going back and working in that little highlighted area, painting in this rose bloom that's off to the side. We allowed that first layer to dry and it gave us a little bit of an advantage. Now let's bring some of this rosiness in. So bright and bold and beautiful against that green. Let's keep that going. So let's get this other bloom up here. A little bit of bleeding is okay. I'm okay with it. Okay, and then we can, let's lift and then add in more color. How fun is this? Just a little technique, that wet into wet technique, that gives you that color variation. That's so fun with loose florals. Practice that all over. All right, and then we've got a blossom here. And I'm just not being too technical. I'm staying loose and I'm working a little bit quickly. All right, blossom there and a blossom here. Really starting to bring in that color. And I think the opera pink is just doing so much heavy lifting all of a sudden, right? So let's get a little bit of blending. Makes it look whimsical. You can do as much of that as you want, but be careful you don't get mud. Okay. Great. Now, all right, so now we're getting to the nitty-gritty. We're going to paint these blossoms. And I'm going to continue to work kind of from the outside in here. And we're going to adjust our brush size soon. So that's something, let's keep that in mind. Now, I want to tackle my darkest flowers first. So let's take a look at the color combination that we can use to get this a little bit darker. I've got this Sennelier red I'm really looking forward to using here. And I'm going to mix it with just a little bit of ultramarine blue, and that's going to darken it and give it almost a violet sort of shade. But I'm not going to add too much. And always test your color mixes. Maybe you don't nail it on the first try. I've got a little bit of extra paint in that color mixture, don't I? Let's see here. I don't think we'll notice that once we get it all blended. All right, get that blended out. I'm using my big brush because I'm looking forward to using it here. Okay, and then you can test that color mixture. Okay, is it red enough? Is it purple enough? I really like this to start. I feel like we nailed it, so let's go with it. All right, let's take that color and let's apply it over here. All right. So I'm just going to follow along the lines that I've drawn, but I'm letting my brush do the work. My brush is doing the heavy lifting. Okay, let's keep moving. This is a flower, particularly when you start to get into the blooms, you do want to still manage your drying times. So maybe you paint one petal at a time and then you work on to the next one. I would encourage you to work quickly, but I would also encourage you to, be careful that you don't use a little too much of a wash, because you don't want to, you don't want your watercolors to start pooling. You want to leave a little bit of highlight. And just kind of loosen up and have fun with it. So let's do that. Let's get through this. I can add yellows, blues, purples. I can make it more intense. And I'm just using my brush stroke to describe the center. Connect some of my petals. Perfect. Now if I want a little bit of yellow in the center, I can add that in. All right, let's keep moving. I'm going to use this same color to describe this flower up here. And work it in. This is a rose petal, so it has kind of delicate edges. Now watch, I'm going to leave just a little bit of space here in between the petals, and that's just going to leave me a little bit of highlight. Just enough. All right. One more, then we're going to go for our grand finale, so to speak. And we're going to make these blooms really happen. All right. A couple of leaves here that we missed. All right, let's get to it. While these are setting up, we're going to go ahead and paint these larger blooms. A little more color mixing is needed, so I am going to move to my round size 10 to make this happen. Let's get it nice and clean. And then I think we do want something that's a little more on the purple or violet side. So let's take our blue. Let's give it a little space here on our well palette. Okay, and let's add in this Sennelier red. Now the scarlet, you might be wondering, well, why can't we use scarlet and mix that with the blue? But the scarlet, when you mix with blue, reads a little more brown. So if you want that more kind of wine stain color, then go with the vermilion. But I'm going to go with the red. Get that mixed in. Let's see what we've come up with here with just equal parts. That's a nice light violet tone. I think we're okay to work with that. And if we add a little bit of red, that's really nice too. So let's test that idea. I love having my little piece of test paper. It just helps to give me some predictability to a process that can be very unpredictable, but in a good way. Unpredictable in a good way. So let's take our big brush and let's use pressure to fill in these big petal spaces. Okay, I think this purple is working out pretty nicely. I can make a more delicate brush stroke if I kind of make my large brush work in smaller ways. And this is not a technical brush stroke. You know, this is mark making. This is really mark making at its best. And particularly if you're looking for a way just to get started, mark making is going to be your #1 exploration technique to getting the results that you want when you go to put that to work. So if you're just starting with watercolor, get your watercolor and a piece of paper out and just start making brush strokes. That's going to be the best way to get started. And then before you know it, you'll be thinking, oh, I want to paint this loose floral. I want to paint foliage. I want to, practice this technique. You'll be right on your way to doing that. Just with getting the watercolor and paper out. All right, I think we said we wanted just a little bit of red, just a little bit. All right, we're getting there. Now, let's deal with our roses. These we can use an incredibly light wash, particularly for this one up here in the corner. So let's just make another custom wash. Let's see here. All right. Not gonna think too hard about it here. Let's mix these together. And that's pretty pink. Let's get this nice and light. Lots of water, so it's nice and pale. All right, let's make this happen. We're going to go right here. And because we have this big brush, I'm going to just go for it. And I'm just bending my brush, giving it a little kind of wiggle, and filling in that space. I can bring some up for a little more highlight, do some lifting. Let's go back in. And you want to hit the edge of your foliage. It can help. Now let's bring in some of this rouge, and I'm just going to keep moving here. And I'm bringing in a different color just to bring in some variation. I think it's nice to have a little bit of variation. All right, perfect. One last flower to go. I hope you've been sticking with us this whole time. What a fun project to be able to just follow along with. I think you're really going to enjoy this if you've been watercoloring for years or if you're just getting started. So let's wrap this up. Just loose. Now this one I like the idea. We're going to lift, we're going to put in just a little bit of yellow. It's just different. Just giving the composition that little bit of variation can really make your painting look interesting. And these watercolors are doing exactly what we want them to do. The color dispersion is perfect on the paper here. These light washes are really working for us. And we're going to get in a couple more brush strokes. sometimes you can angle your foliage to kind of look in different directions, which we've kind of done here. So our foliage is kind of looking in different angles. It helps to give the painting some shape. Perfect. Well, I just love this as a stepping away point for this loose floral demo. I hope that you give this a try. I hope that you fall in love with loose florals as much as we have here at Blick. And we hope you enjoyed our time together, and we look forward to seeing you at our next demonstration. We'll see you there.